Good day. Today we'll be looking at Prelim Practice Paper 3, Booklet A. For the first question, straight off the top, I see words, the reproductive systems, plant and human. So for the reproductive system, it is important that we're able to identify the various parts of the reproductive system of the plant and humans, at the same time know their functions. So the question asked, which parts of the plant reproductive system function in the same manner as parts X and Y of the human reproductive system? So right off the top, let's do some identification first. So D over here is the ovary, C is the ovule, B is the anther, and A is the stigma for your plant. Moving over to your male reproductive system, this is actually your testis. And for your female, this will be your ovary. Now I'm going to add a few more just to help you guys revise. So this is actually your womb or the uterus. This would be your fallopian tube. So when they ask you which part does fertilization occurs, actually the fallopian tubes is where your fertilization will occur. Many students tend to have this misconception that fertilization actually occurs in the womb or the uterus. That's wrong, because the fallopian tube is actually where your egg and your sperm will actually meet each other and fuse. This fusion of these two sex cells results in fertilization. So the same thing over here. Do note that fertilization for plants also happens in the ovary. Alright, so a lot of students have this misconception that once your pollen grain lands on your stigma, the plant is considered fertilized. No, this process of the pollen grain landing on your stigma is known as pollination. It is not to be confused with fertilization, because your sex cells for your plants, the female part, is actually located right here. So your your male sex cell is going to have to travel downwards to meet the female sex cells inside the ovary. That's just some recap. So very straightforward. What is X? X is actually your testis. Alright, it's the part that actually holds your male sex cells for your humans, right? That is actually the same thing for part B of your plant reproductive system, whereby the anther contains your pollen grain, which contains your male sex cells. So in this case, we can say that part X is actually B. So then by elimination method, I know that A and D is wrong, so we go ahead and eliminate these two. Then we look at part Y. Part Y is actually our ovary, and as we have already identified over here, D is actually the ovary. So therefore, answer would be number 4. Question number 2. The diagram below shows the stages in the life cycle of a butterfly when fertilization occurs. Which of the boxes A, B, C, or D represents the stage at which is a garden pest? So, in order for it to be a garden pest, we must ask ourselves, which part of the butterfly's life cycle will probably result in the damage of leaves, and that will actually be our caterpillar, right? So unlike your caterpillar, the adult butterfly actually is beneficial to plants because it helps out in pollination. So that's something we need to take note of. So looking at it, let's take a look. Now, it is stated over here that fertilization has occurred here. So we have to think about it in the sense that when fertilization has occurred, what we get after that is an egg, right? So this is the egg stage. And then from the egg stage, it will hatch, and that's where we get our caterpillar. And then you have our C, which is actually your pupa. Sorry, just 1 second. Let me just... Okay, and then after that, you have your D. After your pupa, you have your adult butterfly over here. So it's important to actually do certain annotations like this. This would really help you to get a better understanding of what exactly the question is asking for. So in this case, the answer would be B. Okay, so just let me correct this. Yeah. Okay, moving on. 3, study the cells below. So straight off, this is a cell question. So once again, for cell question, you have to memorize identification of structures together with its function. Which parts of A, B, C, D, E, and E of the cell labeled above show that the cell was taken from the leaf of a bird nest fern? So right off the top, okay, we need to understand what is bird nest fern. So bird nest fern is a non-flowering plant. Okay, it reproduces by spores. Okay, and it's green, able to make food. Okay, so we also know that, okay, so from this, we know that firstly, it has to be a plant cell. So the fact that it is a plant cell, E will be able to tell me that the structure of, which is actually your cell wall, tells me that it's a plant cell, right? Okay, so let's do some labeling first. So this is the cell wall. This is actually your vacuole. This is your nucleus, chloroplast, as well as your cytoplasm. So out of all this, what will tell me that it is a plant cell? The first thing would be the chloroplast, excuse me, and your cell wall. The rest of these items, which I'm going to use yellow to highlight, are actually common structures that are found in both plant and animal cells. So it won't really help me in differentiating between a plant and animal cell. However, I must point out that there are differences between the vacuole of your plant and animal cells. So animal cells, they tend to be small and numerous, whereas for your plant cell, they tend to be central and only one big one. So we have already identified that the chloroplast and cell wall is going to help us confirm that it's actually a bird nest fern. Cell wall, because all plant cells are cell wall. Okay, chloroplast because it's able to make food. So you will need your chlorophyll in your chloroplast. So answer 3. Next, the diagram below shows the cross sections of a fruit and a flower. Which parts of the flower do not develop into parts of fruits after fertilization? All right, so maybe we should look at the part that first becomes the flesh, right? So the part that actually becomes the flesh, all right, of the fruit is actually B, which is your ovary. Your D is actually becomes the seeds. So when you have multiple seeds, it just means that you've got multiple ovules in an ovary. All right, I hope that was clear. So in this case, obviously the seeds are inside the fruit, right? So anything that is in this whole structure here inside the ovary basically becomes the fruit. So in this case, B and D is definitely the part that will become a fruit, and the answer will be very straightforward in this case. The answer is 2, A and C. Next. Okay, at noon, Susie put a well-watered plant into a black plastic bag. She tied the black plastic bag with a string and placed it in an overfill for 4 hours. So basically, when we read questions, once again, we always want to have a good idea of what questions are they really asking. So this question is related to photosynthesis. So what will confirm my guess would be things like at noon. So noon, I would think that, okay, this has bright sunlight. Light is available, and light is important for photosynthesis. However, they then say that it's put in a black plastic bag. So now the plant is not able to have any light and probably would not be able to undergo photosynthesis. Right? So moving on to the question statement. Which of the following graphs shows the changes in amount of carbon dioxide and oxygen in the black plastic bag over the 4-hour period? So whenever I always tell my students this, before the start of the paper, always write down 2 equations. Photosynthesis word equation and respiration word equation. This would really help you to answer many questions. So I'm going to exemplify just one time over here as a quick revision. So we know that in photosynthesis, you need water, you need carbon dioxide, okay, in the presence of light energy, together with your chlorophyll, which helps to trap it. And then what you would get in return would be your oxygen and glucose, also known as your sugar. So in this case, all right, we know that if photosynthesis occurs, I should get oxygen. But is this the case? No, right? Okay, so because photosynthesis did not occur, we will not get a high amount of oxygen. Now, remember I said that there were 2 equations you're supposed to write. So the second equation that you need to write would actually be respiration. So in respiration, you have your glucose, which is your sugar, together with oxygen. This is broken down to then release energy and carbon dioxide. Now, it is important to recognize that this process of respiration happens in all living things, and plants is also included. Now, for plants, right, it is important to correct this misconception. Students tend to think that in sunlight, plants do not respire. This is absolutely not correct. Why? Because your plant is a living thing. So it will respire 24 hours. So maybe I just put it down here. So all living things respire 24/7. Why? Because to get energy. Right? You will need energy for everything. Even when you're breathing, you are reproducing, anything at all, you will need your energy to do so. So under bright sunlight, what happens is that the rate of oxygen production through photosynthesis is higher than the rate of oxygen intake required for respiration. So when a plant has finished photosynthesis, it will use some of this oxygen for respiration. And then when there's excess, it will give it out. So that is what happens during photosynthesis for plants. But students tend to think that just because the plants are giving out oxygen, it is not respiring. That's not correct. So in our question here, they asked, which of the following graph shows the changes in amount of carbon dioxide and oxygen in a black plastic bag over a 4-hour period? So right off the top, we have to recognize that photosynthesis is not happening, but respiration is happening all the time. So in respiration, oxygen is being taken in. So I have to look for one whereby the oxygen is actually being depleted. Alright, so looking at it, I know that 2 is wrong because 2 is the only one that is straight. The rest, they are all depleting. 1 is also wrong because it is increasing. So right off the top, I will have cancelled out 2 options, leaving me option 3 and 4. Then after that, I also know that in respiration, carbon dioxide is given out. So because carbon dioxide is given out, I should see an increase in carbon dioxide and a decrease in oxygen. Therefore, my answer will be 4. Okay, moving on to question 6. Okay, now, Lenny prepared 3 setups by putting identical amounts of sand, clay, garden soil respective each funnel. She poured 100 ml of water into each funnel. She recorded the amount of water collected in each measuring cylinder after 5 minutes. Which of the following is most likely to be the water level reading for each soil sample? So this I'm going to just go through very quickly because it's not going to be tested. So your answer would be 3. Alright, because you need to understand that of all, your sand does not retain water the most. Okay, so therefore, collection of water will be the most. It just allows it to flow through, followed by your garden soil. And the one that retains the most amount of water will be your clay soil. So because of that, that is the least amount of water being collected. We're skipping 7. Moving on to 8. Algae grow well in the presence of light. So first thing I noticed, algae is a type of plant. Okay, grow well in the presence of light because of photosynthesis. Okay. Continuing, team set up a following experiment to find out how using light bulbs with different colored lights affect how fast algae grow. So this signals to me that it's an experimental question. Okay, I always label my change variable and my measured variable. Now, he noticed that when light from P was used, the algae produced gas bubbles which are collected in a test tube. He recorded the number of bubbles, okay, and then he conducted the same experiment with QRS, and the number of bubbles produced in 1 minute was recorded below. So maybe let me make a small corrections here. So in this case, the measured variable is actually the number of bubbles produced. Okay. Which of the light should he use for a fish tank to prevent the rapid growth of algae? So in this case, there's a few levels to it. So remember, I talked about how the word equation was important for photosynthesis. So if you take a look at here, you first ask yourself, what is this number of bubbles produced? What do they signify? So if you were to look at the word equation, which I've written earlier, you would have known that in photosynthesis, oxygen is being produced. So in this experiment, the bubbles here actually contain oxygen. So what it means is that the higher the amount of oxygen, the higher the amount of photosynthesis is being produced. And is happening. And with higher rate of photosynthesis, you will get a higher rate of glucose production, which essentially translates to growth in plants. So if you want something that is slow growing, then you should choose R, because it actually prevents your algae to grow rapidly. So based on that, the answer should be number 3. Okay, moving on to the next question. John prepared 5 different setups, A, B, C, D, E, to find out how the presence of carbon dioxide affects photosynthesis. Using identical plants in each setup, different conditions of each of the 5 setups were listed below. Which setup should be used to show how presence of carbon dioxide affect photosynthesis? So first things first, once again, we want to know whether or not, what is our change variable. So our change variable, okay, is we're actually looking at whether or not your carbon dioxide is present, and our measured variable is actually rate of photosynthesis. Now, in this question, right, it is actually a fair test question when you think about it. So in fair test questions, there can only be one. I just want to stress again, there can only be one change variable, and the change variable in this case is whether or not your carbon dioxide is present. Alright, other than that, everything else needs to be the same. So therefore, if you look at it, the answer should be number 2. Why is that the case? Let's take a look. So B and E. So let me just go ahead and highlight this, B and E. So if you look at this two, everything else is the same. B has water, E has water, oxygen in B, oxygen for E. There's no fertilizer for B, no fertilizer for E. Sunlight for B, sunlight for E. And no fertilizer, no carbon dioxide for B, but carbon dioxide for E. So if you look at it, right, the only one that is different would be your carbon dioxide, and this is the one that we should be looking at. Okay, we are skipping question 10. Okay, moving on. Adrian had to classify 4 animals below. He classified them using the flowchart below. What are the 2 questions in the flowchart A? Questions A and B in the flowchart shown above. Okay, so this is a question on animal cycle. It's basically on cycles, life cycle. Now, so you have to classify the 4 animals, right? So you take a look at these 4 categories, and what you need to realize that to answer this kind of question, you really do need to know the characteristics of each, category of animals. So for example, the bat is a mammal. So you will need to know that, it gives birth to its young alive, it feeds its young milk, and then your cockroach will be an insect, your duck will be a bird, and then your frog will actually be an amphibian. Okay? So basically, based on all these different things, you will need to be able to then know what are the characteristics, so that you know what's common and what's not common between them. Okay? So let's take a look. Now, question A. Okay, the frog has answered no, the rest of her answered yes. So ask yourself this question: out of all this, which is unique to the frog is a no? So do they lay eggs? Well, your frog lay eggs, so that cannot be the question. Okay, do they have wings? Your bat has wings, your cockroach has wings, your birds have wings. So the only one that is not does not have wings is actually your frog. So this is possible. Okay, so 1 we cross out, 2 we keep. Do they lay eggs? We know that this is crossed out, right? Okay, so we move on to question B. So out of these 3, okay, what is a no for bat and a yes for everyone else? So let's take a look at option 2. Do they lay eggs? So your cockroach lay eggs, your bird lay eggs, but your bat do not. So this is actually a plausible answer. But let's go on to check. Okay, for the last one, do they give birth to the young alive? This is actually not correct for the bat. The bat gives birth. Okay, so by answering no to this question, you have been wrong. So this confirms that our answer is actually 2. Moving on, a florist wanted to find out if the stem of a flower takes in water. She placed a white flower in the beaker containing 200 ml of water, okay, with red food coloring dye, as shown. Which of the following should she use as a control? Now, a control basically shows that whatever results that you have gotten is due to the experimental variation that you have made. Okay, so in this case, you're talking about whether or not the stem is the one that takes in water, correct? So in a way, this is like your change variable up to a certain extent. So when you do an experiment, you want to prove that the result is due to a certain factor that you're investigating. And in this case is whether or not the stem is the one that takes in water. So if let's just say in one setup, you already have your stem, right? Then in your control setup, you need to prove that whatever changes, so in this case, your white flower becomes red because the red water was being taken up by the stem, then your stem cannot be there. So in this case, the answer will be 3. So because if you take a look at it, you actually wrap, okay, your plastic wrap around the stem. So this prevents any water coming into contact with your stem. So in a sense, your stem is not there. Okay, so therefore, proving that if the flower turns red, it'll be because your stem has taken in water. So answer would be 3. Moving on, okay, the diagram shows a human digestive system. So once again, for the human digestive system, you will need to learn how to identify the various parts and at the same time, look at what are its function, how is it related. Now, then it goes on to say, Gary, Harry, Irene, Jadine, each made a statement about the digestive system. Okay, then they ask you, which of the following correctly matches each statement with the labeled parts of the digestive system above? So once again, we have to do labeling. So the first up, in this part, this is the gullet. Q will be your stomach. R will be your large intestine. S will be your anus or your rectum. Sorry, in this case, I think it's more of a rectum. And then T will be your small intestines. Okay, so now let's go ahead and then match. Okay, so it states that in this case, solid waste is found here. So your rectum is in charge of storing solid waste. Okay, so in this case, S will be for Gary. Digestion is completed here. That will be your small intestines. So your small intestine has 2 functions. The first function is actually for digestion of food. I think I should just pen this down really quickly. That's complete digestion of food. And the second function would be the absorption of digested food into your bloodstream, okay, so that it can be circulated around your body. So that will be your T. Irene says water is absorbed from undigested food. That is your R, your large intestines. And then last, digestive juices are added here. That would be your... Okay, actually for this part, right, digestive juices are added here. Now, I'm going to have to say that for this particular statement, there are multiple answers. it could be Q, it can also be T. Alright, so both your small intestines and your stomach, they do add digestive juices, but since T has already been used up for this, we are going to go with we're going to go with Q, okay, because T has been used up. So then we cross check, and the answer would be number 1. Next question 14. The circulatory system carries blood containing gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide through blood vessels to all parts of the body. The following diagram shows blood flow in different parts of the circulatory system. So once again, this has got to do with circulatory system right off the top, because I see the diagram of the circulatory system. Okay, and then they give you a key to tell you what is rich in oxygen and what is rich in carbon dioxide. So as a thumb of a rule, blood that's rich in oxygen will definitely be one that is coming out of your lungs, because gaseous exchange has just happened there, okay, whereby your lungs will actually take in oxygen and give out carbon dioxide. Okay, so therefore, this is actually rich in oxygen. Okay, and then after it gets resupplied with oxygen, it will then go into your heart, and from there on, your oxygenated blood will then exit the heart and go to all parts of your body. Now, the reason why that is the case is because your body needs to carry out respiration. And if you remember correctly, in respiration, you need oxygen. So therefore, the blood that is entering the body from the heart needs to be rich in oxygen. Once it exits out, okay, it will be poor in oxygen but rich in carbon dioxide, because your body parts will have already carried out respiration, whereby carbon dioxide is given out, okay, goes back into your heart, okay, because now it's poor in oxygen, it needs to go back to your lungs to actually be re-oxygenated. Okay, so therefore, we've already drawn up the diagram, we just need to match it to the option, and the answer would be 1. Next, 3 similar pots of plants of the same mass, P, Q, and R, are used in the experiment shown below. They are placed in airy and sunny place. Each pot of the plant is watered with 300 ml of water. Which of the setup correctly shows the observation after a day? So basically, if you take a look at this, you need to ask yourself, what is the difference between these 3? Now, if you look at these 3, the plastic bag is really preventing, not light in this case, in the first case, but really altering the concentration of water, right, that is being enclosed in this system. So for example, in P, you realize that any water loss in this case is going to condense onto your plastic bag. So in a way, it doesn't really leave the system completely. And then after that, in Q, any water loss is going to just be lost to the environment. So in a way, water has mass. So when that happens, your plant Q is going to lose mass because it has lost water. Okay, and then after that, your R in this case would have also lost water as mass, because the leaves are the part whereby water loss is the most. Now, the process in which water vapor is being lost through the leaves is called transpiration. Alright, so the stomata are basically tiny openings usually found on the underside of your leaves. So they serve 2 purposes. One is for transpiration. The second one is actually for gaseous exchange. So then they ask you, which of the following setup shows the correct observation? So right off the top, I'm going to say that the answer is actually 1. So like I say, in P, any water vapor that is lost is actually trapped within the bag, and it will condense onto the bag. However, for Q, any water that is lost is just lost to the surrounding. So this will actually have less mass than P. So this is correct. B is actually wrong because technically speaking, they both will have lost the same amount of water, because like I say, water is lost mainly through the leaves. So even though you put this back here, it doesn't really affect much. However, I must say that technically this should go up, and this should go down, simply because the back here actually prevents evaporation. So at least some amount of water would be retained here. Okay? So if you were to compare which one has the most amount of water, I would say that it will be this one, plant P, followed by R, followed by Q. Now, the table below shows freezing and boiling points of substance C, D, E, and F. At which temperature will only two of the substances be at its liquid state? Okay, so to do this, I always draw this temperature line to help myself make sense of things. Okay, so I have freezing here. Your freezing point is also known as your melting. And then I have boiling. So, and then I will label the states. Okay, so anything that is actually before my freezing point is actually a solid. Okay, anything that is after, and of course temperature is moving in this way. Okay, this is temperature. So as temperature increases above freezing or melting point, it will be a liquid. And then after that, when it gains more heat, anything that's after boiling point is actually a gas. So with this, I'm able to actually answer the question. Okay, so the question asked, at which temperature will only two of the above substances be at its liquid state? Okay, so let's take a look at it. At 2 degrees Celsius, we know that 2 degrees Celsius for C, okay, it's below its melting point. So 2 degrees is its freezing point. If it's 15 over here, 2 degrees is somewhere over here. So it's going to be a solid, right? Okay, so looking at that, I know that C, okay, at 2 degrees Celsius is not going to be a liquid. So I'm going to cross this out. Okay, now this one tells me that 0 degrees. So at 0 degrees, because 12 degree, sorry, at 2 degrees, it is actually above its freezing or melting point. So it will become a liquid, and its boiling point is only 100. So yes, I know that this will actually become a liquid. And then at C, I know that, for E, I know at 7, since the freezing point is only at 7, at 2 degrees, it is still a solid, so this is a no. And then at F, 2 degrees is actually below 4. So this tells me that since it's below, 2 is below 4, okay, it will still be a solid, so no. So in this case, straight off the top, I know that, okay, there are 3 that is actually not a liquid state, and only 1 is. So this does not fulfill my 2. So right off the top, I know that answer 1 is wrong. So due to time constraint, I'm just going to go to the correct one. So the correct one is actually 25 degrees. So let's take a look at why is that the case. Now for C, the freezing point is at 15. So at 25, it's somewhere here. So it's actually after its melting or freezing point, so it becomes a liquid. And its boiling point is only at 35. So at 25, I have not reached my boiling point yet. So therefore, yes, it's going to be a liquid. Then after that, I take a look at D. Its freezing point is at 0. The temperature is at 25. So therefore, since 25 degrees is above the freezing or melting point, it is going to be a liquid. Now it will only boil at 100 degrees. So therefore, it has 25 degrees is not above boiling point, so it's going to stay a liquid. So this too is a yes. Now let's take a look at E. Now in E, okay, so what happens is E, the freezing point is at 7. Okay, 2 is actually before the freezing or melting point, so therefore it is still a solid. So answer is no, it cannot be a liquid. And for F, it is above 4 is actually the freezing point is actually 4, which is over here. Okay, 25 degrees is actually above it, so yes, it's going to be a liquid, but wait, because 25 degrees is also above boiling point, it's going to be a gas. So in this case, no, it is also not going to be a liquid. Sorry, can I just re-explain for E again? So for E, as I was saying, because E's freezing point is at 7 degrees, 25 degrees is above 7, which is over here. So therefore, it is a liquid. Okay? And at the same time, because 25 degrees is also above the boiling point, it's going to be a gas. So therefore, E will also not be a liquid at 25 degrees. It is going to be a gas. So in this case, all right, the answer is C and D, which is actually 2 of the substances is going to be at liquid. So answer is 3. So you can try out the rest for yourself. So to do this, right, what you need to do is you need to actually determine at 25 degrees what is the state. So if I'm going to do this for the correct answer, right? So C will actually be a liquid. D would be a liquid. E in this case will be a gas. F will also be a gas because at 25 degrees it's already higher than the boiling point. So it's beyond its boiling point, it will be a gas. Okay, so you can do this for the remaining to just check your understanding that you know how to do this type of question. Okay, question 17. Mike wanted to find out how well 3 containers of different materials could conduct heat. The containers were equal in volume and contain the same amount of water. They were placed on the heating source as shown in figure 1. After 30 minutes, he observed changes in the water levels of 3 containers as shown in the figure. Okay, so basically right off the top, the change variable would be the 3 different materials. Okay, and then after that, you see that the water level has changed. Now, the first question I will ask myself is, what happened to the water? So water cannot just disappear like that. So the fact that it cannot be seen anymore tells me that it must have undergone evaporation. So because it has undergone evaporation, right? And I know that for evaporation to happen, heat gain must happen. So you think about it, if the heat source is here, okay, and we're talking about, of course, heat needs to be gained to the containers. So basically, the better the container is, the better the conductor of heat the material is, then the faster the heat will actually be conducted to the water, enabling it to evaporate at a faster rate. So right off the top, I already know that C is the best material. Sorry, B is the best material because it has the least amount of water left. So this tells me that it has undergone the highest rate of evaporation due to the largest amount of heat gain. Okay? And A would be the worst. So in this case, the answer would be number 3. Okay, number 18. The diagram below shows a cooking pot. Study the properties of the 4 materials shown below. Okay, which material is suitable for making the body of a cooking pot? So first things first, okay, you want to really be able to show what is basically the purpose, right? So a purpose of a cooking pot tells me that I want to have good it needs to be a good conductor of heat so that heat can be transferred from the heat source to the cooking pan ASAP. Okay, and then this would actually allow my food to be cooked in the shortest amount of time. At the same time, I also do not want my pot to be flexible. This is so that it will not bend when I put in a lot of food in it. So I do not want it to be flexible, and I want it to be a good conductor. So in this case, the one that fulfills this would be answer C. Okay, the diagram below shows 4 beakers containing water at different temperatures. The 4 beakers are placed in the science laboratory at a room temperature of 25 degrees. Which of the beakers will evaporation of water takes place? Alright, so if you actually understand the concept, of evaporation, we know that evaporation happens at any temperature. So because of that, it doesn't matter at what temperature the water is at, as long as it's above melting point and below freezing point. Okay? So in this case, the answer would be at 4. Now I know that I said below boiling point, and then you'll be thinking, oh, but this is at 100 degrees. But when you think about it, the person did not place the beaker on a fire consistently. So what actually happens is that because it's not placed consistently on the fire, eventually the temperature, the minute you leave the heat source, the temperature will start to drop already. So when it starts to drop, evaporation will happen. So of course it's different if you put it under a heat source and you say you leave it under a laboratory, because then it'll be constantly be at 100 degrees, and of course boiling will happen. All right, question 20. Okay, Ben fills a syringe with some water as shown in the diagram below. He pushes the plunger inwards, until he could not push any further. Which of the following correctly describes what will happen to the volume of air and water in the syringe after he pushes the plunger inwards? Now, this is a very, 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 very common question. So right off the top, they're trying to test you the property of various states of matter. So in this case, we need to recall. Now, what are they testing you on? They're testing you on whether or not the matter has a fixed volume. So we know that air has no fixed volume, and hence it is able to be compressed. Okay, whereas your water in this case has a fixed volume because it's liquid and it cannot be compressed. So right off the top, very simple. The answer is 1. The volume of air will have decreased because when you push, you are compressing the air. So when it compresses, the volume actually becomes smaller. But for water, it has a fixed volume. It cannot be compressed and it will remain the same. Moving on to the next question. The diagram below shows a water cycle. Okay, which of the following represents A, B, and C? So for this type of question, right, it's good to run through and then try to justify the various processes or the various elements of the cycle. Okay, so let's start off somewhere that we definitely know. So for me, I always like to start off with somewhere that I'm very confident. Usually that is right before a process or right after. So you can choose either condensation or evaporation. I'm going with evaporation simply because A follows after that. Now we know that in evaporation, all right, it is actually the gain of heat from its surrounding. And then after that, what happens is that liquid water will become water vapor. So right off the top, I know that A in this case is water vapor. It is right after a process. Then your water vapor, okay, will undergo condensation whereby it will lose heat. Okay, after it loses heat, it actually becomes tiny water droplets, right? Or water droplets. Now, there is no process here and it returns back to the river. So in this case, all right, it will have fallen as rain because there's no change in state between these two. This must be rain. So your tiny water droplets over here are actually suspended in the air, also known as your clouds. So with that in mind, we will have already filled in all the blanks and correctly identify as number 2, whereby A is your water vapor, B are your clouds, and C would be your rain. Question 22. The diagram below shows the path a ball takes from P to R after Tim hits it at P. Okay, which of the following correctly describes energy in the ball? Alright. So in this case, you have to run through each and every single one. A, the ball had no kinetic energy at Q. That's wrong. Okay, so remember it's in a constant motion. So definitely the ball is still moving. Okay, so this is wrong. B, the ball had more kinetic energy at P than at Q. Definitely. Alright, because the kinetic energy, alright, at Q, most of the kinetic energy will have been converted to gravitational potential energy. Okay, so definitely right at the start there is more because KE is being actually changed to GPE. So yes. So from Q to R, the amount of kinetic in the energy, okay, increases while the amount of gravitational potential energy decreases from Q to R. Now, for this is actually true because when you look at it, okay, the height of it as it goes from Q to R is actually decreasing. Alright, and GPE at this point of time is being converted into KE. Alright, so the more GPE that's being converted to KE, so obviously your GPE will actually decrease. At the same time, okay, your GPE is also decreasing because of the height. Alright, so answer would be C. From Q to R, the amount of kinetic energy in the ball decreases while the amount of gravitational potential energy increases. This is definitely wrong. Why? Because if you take a look in terms of height, your height is decreasing, and height is one thing that increases GPE. So in this case, your height is decreasing, so therefore your GPE should also decrease and not increase. So in this case, your answer is B and C. Next, Megan had a toy shown below. The toy consisted of a pull rod and a spring which could be used to shoot a ball out. Okay, when Megan pulled the rod this way, the spring in the toy was compressed and the ball was moving downwards. Which of the following forces causes the ball to move downwards? Okay. So as we all know, anything on Earth, right? You have your your gravitational force acting on it. So when you pull, okay, you lower the spring, your ball will automatically fall down, alright, roll towards this direction due to gravity. Okay, so the answer should be 3. 4. Daisy placed two similar iron nails M and N next to a magnet as shown in the diagram. When Daisy picked up a magnet, only iron nail M remained attached to the magnet. Which of the following statement best explains Daisy's observation? Okay, so take a look at this question. Now, first things we have to decide, okay, whether or not, okay, what are the magnetic materials? So we know that they are both magnetic materials because they are both iron nails, all right. But they tell you that only M remains attached. Okay, so we know that these two are not magnets. Okay, so right off the top for A is wrong because we know that only magnets with like poles facing each other can repel each other. So because the nails, they are not magnets, we know that it cannot repel. A is out. Okay, the magnet lost its magnetism at point X. You know that is not possible. Also, if a magnet has lost its magnetism, the whole magnet, alright, has no magnetism. So we look at C. Iron nail M was attracted to the pole as the magnet attraction of the pole was the strongest. Yes, this is actually true. So at the two ends at the poles, the strength of magnetism for the magnet is actually the strongest, and therefore that's why your iron nail actually remain attached. So the answer should be C only. 25. James had cubes of the same size but made up of different materials. He placed the two cubes on two identical springs as shown in the diagram. Okay, based on his observation, what can he conclude from the experiment? Okay, so right over here, let's take a look to see what is correct and what is wrong. We will have to run through every single options in order to eliminate them. So the first one, cube A has a larger mass than cube B. This is not correct because if cube A has a larger mass, alright, technically speaking, given that the springs are identical and the size is identical of the two cubes, then spring A should your gravity should exert a stronger force on your cube A, and you will pull it further down. So it should have in fact a more compressed spring than B. So that didn't happen. So only cube B experiences elastic spring force. This is also wrong because if you look at it, your A has also compressed your spring by a good 2 cm. Right? So because it's being compressed, it will experience some form of elastic spring force. 3. Cube A experiences more gravitational force than cube B. In this case, it's not correct again. Because remember, gravitational force is affected by your mass. The larger the mass, the larger the amount of gravitational force. But in this case, this did not happen. As you can see, it is actually B that experiences a greater amount of gravitational force as it got compressed more. It's got pulled down more by gravity, compressing your spring more. So this is also wrong. So we're left with the last option. Cube B experiences more elastic spring force than cube A. This is actually correct. Why? Because in cube B, the spring actually got compressed more and they are identical. So because of that, we can say that due to the amount of more compression, all right, cube B would actually have more spring force. So the answer is 4. 26. Study the experiment below. Brian used a piece of brick as shown in the diagram. Okay. Now in diagram A, Brian placed a metal cube on the brick and measured the amount of force needed to move both brick and metal cube across a table. Okay. Using a spring balance. He then turned the brick over and repeated the experiment as shown in diagram B. Okay, he repeated the experiment using a heavier cube. His results are shown below. So as you can see over here, the difference between A and B is that your brick is being turned into different orientation. So the first orientation will give you less surface area in contact with the surface, and this one will give you more surface area in contact. This is the main difference. Okay, now which of the following best explains Brian's observation? Okay, now they then show you the results, right, and they say which one best explain. So if you were to take a look at it, okay, in this question, the area of contact with the table does not affect the amount of force needed. Because when you see, okay, when you take a look at it, okay, area of contact, all right, when they are the same, the mass is the same, and the area of contact is different, the force needed is still the same at 50. Okay, this is also similar, okay, for the 1.5 kg cube. All right, so C is correct. Now, you will also notice another thing, and that is the greater the mass of the object, the greater amount of force is needed to move the object. So how do we know that? So at 1.5, if you compare the 1.5, okay, of course you have to actually look at the one with the same area of contact. So I'm just going to look at this and this. All right, you will notice that given that they are the same area of contact, okay, the mass being different, the amount of force needed is actually greater. So D is actually correct. So therefore the answer is C and D. Alright, question 27. During PE lesson, Matthew picked up a ball from the floor and threw it against the wall as shown in the diagram. The ball hit the wall at W and landed at point X and rolled on the floor. So he threw, hit the wall, went down, and it rolled, before finally stopping at Y. What are some effects of forces that can be observed and below? So right off the top, we must remember, okay, what are some of the ability of a force? So a force can change a direction of a moving object, it can stop a moving object, it can speed up a moving object, it can even change the shape. So all this is should be in your brains, okay? You should memorize them. However, the case in this question is that they're asking you which of it is happening at a different part of it. So if you take a look at it, I would say that the answer is all of the above, which is number 4. And I will explain to you why. So as you can see, when you throw the ball, what happens is that, okay, when you first throw the ball, you will need to, it starts off stationary, right? So he picks up from the ball and he threw. So imagine it holding in the air is so called stationary, and then when you throw it, you start the movement. As it hits, okay, the wall, okay, you would actually change the direction. Okay, you will change the direction, and then it went downwards. And not only that, when it moves downwards, okay, it starts to, instead of moving down, it starts to move horizontally, and it starts to slow down before finally stopping. So there are various forces in actions here. You have friction that is moving in this direction, okay, that slows down and stops the ball eventually. Okay, you have gravity, okay, that basically pulls it down. Okay, so there are many forces, okay, that's happening. The important thing is to recognize how each of these forces affected the ball and in what way for this question. All right, question 28, last question. Okay, Jerry tested the circuit card using the setup as shown below. The circuit card consists of metal pins at each of the points A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Some of the metal pins are connected by wires behind the card. Okay, now with circuit diagram cards, right, the usual one like this, right, the whole idea is you do not know how are these wires conducted. This is something that you don't know. And the question is going to ask you how is the wire connected at the back, and that is what you need to find out. That is the whole gist of the question. So what you would see are these pins. So you have to figure out how is the wire connected at the back, such that when I connect my bulbs, it will actually light up according to your table. Okay, so it goes, he connected the two ends of the setup to two different pins on the circuit card. The results are shown in the table below. From the result shown, which of the following is not a possible arrangement of the wires behind the circuit card? So in this case, the three must be correct with one that is wrong. Okay, so I'm going to show you one that is correct and then one that is wrong, so that you're able to know what to do in exams. So to make things simple, I'm just going to start off with number 1. So remember, okay, you have essentially a light bulb. Okay, so you're going to connect this light bulb. Okay, so they say that if you connect A and D, so A and D, all right, the light bulb did not light up. Is this true? Yes. Why? Because if we were to look, there is a gap over here. The circuit is not complete. So this is correct. And then you can redo for A and G, which is the next one, right? A and G. A, and then the next one is G. So once again, the circuit is complete in this case. So if you were to run through the circuit, it is complete and it will light up. Okay, and then you will run through the whole entire series of this. Okay, so we're just going to very quickly run through to show you. So one end must connect to B and the other end must connect to F. So when you take a look at it, it says it didn't light up. Trace, once again, yes, because there are gaps, it will not light up. Okay, and then the next one, you have C and E. So one end goes to C, the other end goes to E. Okay, it will light up because it's a complete circuit. So this is correct. So 1 is actually not the answer because it will light up. So then you move on to the next one and then you try again. Okay, so the first one is A and D. So A and D. So straight away, I realized that this is already wrong. Okay, why? Because it is a complete circuit, right? So because of that, okay, it should light up with this circuit, and therefore the answer is actually 2. Okay, so this is not a possible one because it did not tally with my table. So usually they will ask for which of the one that is possible, but in this case they ask for not possible. All right, so with that, we've come to the end of this paper. Thank you. All right, for this question, okay, Mark designed the following circuit for a car park entry barrier that he wanted to install at his home. The proposed car park entry system, as shown in the diagram below, will lift upwards when a car stops on the metal plate. So first thing, we have to identify important things. So this is your metal plate. Okay, so when your metal plate is something goes on your metal plate, this barrier will be lifted upwards. So let's see what happens. Now, the question asks, explain why the barrier moves upwards when the car stops on the metal plate. So when you think about it, when you have a car that is resting on your metal plate, okay, a certain amount of mass is actually being placed on this metal plate. And due to gravity, as you know, gravity acts on the mass, it will actually be pushed downwards. So when it's being pushed downwards, okay, it will actually touch these two springs over here. So when these two springs are being pushed down, let's take a look what happens. So when the spring gets, when the metal plate, so I'm going to use a gray color to represent metal plate, gets pushed down here, you realize that it touches the two springs and a complete circuit is being formed. So if you take a look at your battery, okay, remember electric current always flows from positive side. It will flow this way, okay, in a complete circuit. So because it's actually a closed circuit, your iron bar here would then become an electromagnet. So because it becomes an electromagnet, it will then attract your iron weight. So your iron weight is basically a magnetic material. Now I know I've done this so many times, but you know, these are very, very common things. So magnetic material, always remember coins. Okay, CO stands for cobalt. I stands for iron. N stands for nickel. And S stands for steel. Alright, so when you attract this iron weight down towards this way, it will cause your barrier to tilt upwards. And this is how the whole thing goes. Now, so you know that this question has got to do with a circuit being complete. Whenever that happens, you want to use your CEO strategy for answering. So C stands for whether the circuit is closed or open. E stands for whether electric current can flow through. And O stands for the outcome. The outcome needs to change according to the question. So how would I craft the answer for this? So let's jump straight into it. So we know that, okay, when the car stops on the metal plate, now you have to tell me what is the direction of it. Okay, the metal plate will move down. Okay, touching the spring. Okay, then CEO. The circuit becomes a closed circuit and electricity can flow through. Okay, so then what happens once it can flow through? The iron bar becomes an electromagnet which attracts the iron weight. Okay, so where are the key ideas? The key ideas are here. First thing, iron plate moves down. Second point, becomes a closed circuit. Third point, electricity can flow through. And the last one, becomes electromagnet which attracts the iron weight. Okay, so this CEO strategy is something that I thought you
Alright, it is very, very useful whenever you have an electrical circuit question and it asks you to explain. Make sure you use this strategy. Okay, so if I'm going to put it into context, if for CEO, this actually is your C, can flow through is your E, and the outcome is over here, your O. Alright, next question. Mark noticed that the barrier did not lift up when motorcycles, which weigh less than cars, stop on the metal plate. Suggest one change that he could make to the setup in order to ensure that the barrier lifts up even when the lighter vehicle stops on the metal plate. Now, in this question, if you look at it, the whole idea of it is that why didn't the motorcycle work was due to the fact that it was too light. Because with motorcycles, right, as you compare, okay, to the other one, it's too light, not enough mass. So what happens that the metal plate will not touch your contacts. Okay, so maybe it gets lowered to perhaps this level, somewhere here. There is still a gap. So how do you close this gap? It doesn't matter if you use a stiffer or a less stiff spring. The fact that it doesn't touch means it doesn't touch. I don't care whether the spring is can be compressed easily or is it less stiff, more stiff. Never touch means open circuit. So in this case, there's only one way, which is actually to make the spring longer so that it touch, or you lower the plate, okay, so that the distance that your motorcyclist needs to push the metal plate down is smaller. Okay, so you can say increase the length of the spring. Okay, so by extending the length of the spring, you have closed the gaps between, or make the gap between the spring and the metal plate smaller. So now the motorcycle, when it's on the metal plate, will have a smaller distance, okay, to move downwards in order to touch the contacts. Okay, so one very important thing that I want to point out for all students would be that more often than not, every time they see the word spring, they will straight away think about it being stiffer or less stiff. No, or it being compressed more or less. No. Sometimes the spring is just there, okay, to act as a distraction, like in this question. In this question, right, you don't need the ability for the spring to be compressed is not needed at all. It basically acts like a conductor of electricity. That's all. So I could literally replace the spring with something else, like a metal bar or metal contact. It would have still worked. Okay? Next. Now the diagram below shows a sharp toy attached to a plastic base using a pin. Magnets X and Y, okay, these are the two makes they float above the plastic base. So what happens over here is that you have two magnets and they are floating. So because they are floating, there must be some force that is acting, okay, in opposite directions. So in order for that to happen, you know that these two must be like poles. So that means this here must be north and this must be south. So explain how the toy shop was able to float. Okay, so in this case, the answer is very, very straightforward. Would be that, make sure you mention, okay, very importantly, the light poles of both magnets were facing each other. Hence, they repelled. So what are the key marking points I'm looking for? First things, I must see light poles facing each other. Second thing is the word repel. So I know that the force are actually acting against each other. Then the next question asks, weights were added to the toy shark and the distance between the two magnets were measured. The results were shown in the table. So your toy shark is here. You add some weights. I don't know where you add. You can add here, you can add here. But the whole idea now is, what has changed? The mass of the shark has increased. So because it has increased, you will also realize that your gravitational force or acting on the shark will also have increased, because a greater mass leads to a greater amount of gravity. So your gravity force is pulling the shark downwards. So at first it is at this level here. So maybe after you add in the mass, it will go further down, and your new level may be somewhere here. So your shark lowers a bit. So what happens, from here to here is that your gravity overcame the repulsion force of your magnets. So you can say that the heavier weight is pushing down or acting down, pushing down on the repulsion of the magnets, thus decreasing the distance. All right. Moving on. Next, to ensure that passengers in a car are safe during a car crash, car manufacturers conduct crash tests where cars are driven into car crash barriers as shown. So this is a car crash barrier, in the diagram below. Cars A, B, C were driven into the car crash barrier at the same speed. The maximum depth of the depression, so this is the depression over here, for each car was taken and recorded in the table below. So right off the top, this is an experimental question. You need to always identify your change variable and your measured variable. And then you should also ask yourself, what does it translate to and why are the results like that? Not straight away jump into answering the question, but really try to unpack for yourself what is the point of this experiment and what do the results signify. So as you know, Over here is your depression. So ask yourself, why is there a greater depression? So in order to make a greater depression, you need to have greater KE, kinetic energy. So the greater the kinetic energy, the greater, okay, the depression would be. Alright, and that is the reason why. Okay? So you should be able to actually understand that. Okay? So because the greater depression is caused by greater KE, it also means that a greater KE is related to a greater mass. Why? Because if you look at your results, you would see that as your mass increases, your depression also increases. And since you were able to relate that a greater depression is caused by a greater KE, and also that as the mass of car increases, the depression also increases, it must means that a car with a greater mass would result in greater KE, which would then result in greater depression as reflected in your results. So with that in mind, you can then answer the following questions. So based on the findings above, state the relationship between the mass of the car, okay, and the amount of kinetic energy. Now, be very careful. Some of you just happily copy this. So you would say, as the mass of the car increases, the maximum depth of depression also increases. This is wrong because the question is not asking you for maximum depth of depression. You are not answering question. Instead, what you need to do is, you need to be able to relate that a greater KE actually causes the greater depth of depression. So like what I explained, okay, as mass of car increases, KE also increases. So how would the answer look like? Okay, as the mass of the car increases, the amount of kinetic energy the car possesses also increases. So make sure you don't straight away jump to the graph, and just because the heading is like this, you follow the heading for the relationship question. That's not right. Read the question properly. Now, without making any changes to car B, state one change. Okay, no changes. State one change that could be made so that B makes a deeper depression. So remember this, in order for it to make a deeper depression, you would actually need to have a more KE. So ask yourself, in this case, how can you get more KE? So remember that when you are driving, okay, there are other energy conversions, okay, and one of them is actually to heat, all right, and heat is actually a resultant of friction, right? So when there's friction, okay, due to it, heat or even sound energy will be converted as your car is traveling. So you want to reduce friction so that there is actually more KE. All right. So when you talk about reduction in friction, right? Okay. Make sure you talk about where do you apply the lubricant. Okay, so the common thing is to apply lubricant, right? But where do you apply it? Okay, don't just say use a lubricant, but talk about it. Where do you apply? Okay, so apply a lubricant Okay, I usually will give an example such as oil, okay, onto the wheels, okay, or onto the surface, okay. Of car B. Okay. Next, state the energy conversion when the moving car hit the car crash barrier. So the first thing is the word moving would have been a very strong signal to you that the first energy here must be kinetic. There is nothing else because they did say it's moving already. Then after that, when it crashed into the barrier, okay, the fact that there is movement, right? It actually changes the shape. There's some movement within it. That is also kinetic. And then you have sound energy. Okay, just like when you drop something on the floor, or or when you hear accidents, okay, it's always a loud crash. In your composition, you all like to write things like crash or bang, okay, things like that when two items collide together. So the sound energy, okay, together with heat energy, because when the two surfaces are in contact, okay, it will cause friction, and then as a result of friction, you have heat energy. Okay. Now, usually for this type of question, okay, I must stress. I stress and stress and stress again. If in the exam they ask you to do like state the energy conversion, then they give you a few boxes to fill in. This is to help you answer the next question. That means you must make use of what you have here to answer the next question usually. Let me demonstrate for you. What do I mean? From the above findings, okay, see, above findings is here. Explain why trucks which have a larger mass than cars have a maximum speed limit of 70 kilometers on the expressway, while cars have a speed limit of 90. So first thing first, ask yourself, what is the difference between trucks and cars? So the main idea is that it is a larger mass. So we know that with larger mass, it also means that it probably will have a higher amount of kinetic energy. And higher kinetic energy, right, which means it will translate to a greater depression. So more damage during a car crash, when you think about it in that sense, right? Because since it is able to depress something more with a greater amount of kinetic energy, it also means that the damage that's being caused to the other car or to the cars that are involved in the accident will be greater for the truck. Okay, so how can we do this? So trucks which have a larger mass will have more kinetic energy. Now be very careful because it is actually this question is a superlative question, which means that the word more needs to be there, because both your car and your moving truck, they will have kinetic energy. Okay, so you must state what's the difference. Than a car. Hence, it will make a greater depression upon impact. Okay, so the impact depends on what you're hitting. It could be a car, it could be a wall, it could be a fence. Alright? Alright, question 38. Rosa saw her mother sharpening a knife using the object M as shown in the diagram below. Her mother placed the knife on object M and moved the knife over object M in a forward and backward motion. Explain how the above action done by her mother helps to sharpen the metal part of the knife. So a few things to note. The first few things is that you will realize that forward and backward motion. So forward and backward motion, this will actually hint you that the force that is in play here is actually your friction. And friction typically generates heat. Okay? So in the first question, they want to know How does it help to sharpen? So we have to understand that how a blade works. Okay, this is actually quite an abstract question. You think about it. Why is it that with a thumbtack or a pin, you're able to pierce things easily as compared to something that is not so thin or not so small in terms of surface area? So if you have a thumbtack or a pin, you realize that the tip edge of it, right, is the thinnest, okay, or the smallest, okay, surface area in contact with anything you want to pin. So the reason is, the smaller the surface area in contact, the greater the pressure. Okay, because all the mass or all the weight, if you think about it, of this thing is acting on one small narrow point. So that makes it sharp. So in the same case, when you look at a knife, the thinner the blade is, okay, the sharper the knife would be. Okay, I'm talking about thickness now. So when we look at the thickness of a knife, if you will look at it really at the blades, you realize that the blades, right, towards the edge of the blade, it is actually tapered down to become very thin and sharp. So when you are actually sharpening a knife, what you're actually doing is that you're making sure that this edge remains thin. So sometimes it becomes blunt, right? When it becomes blunt, as you use a knife, what actually happens is that, I imagine it to be, is that the edge will look like this, no longer sharp anymore. So when you use frictional force, okay, you want to erase away this portion. Right? I'm shading it for you, so that it actually becomes sharp again. So think about it. If you want to erase this part off, you need to make sure that it wears and tears off. So that is exactly something that your friction is able to do. So besides producing heat, your friction will also cause wear and tear. Right? So in your answer, you have to include this point. Okay? So how would the answer look like? So the first thing would be friction between blade of knife and object M wears and tears, causes wears and tears to the edge of the blade. Okay? Hence, reducing the thickness of blade, making it sharper. Alright, so key ideas, I'm just going to quickly highlight it here. So obviously we talk about friction because we already identified that it's friction. So but what is it that causes it to be sharpened? Make sure you talk about the wear and tear part. Also make sure the word between is there. Now I've mentioned this many times, but still there are nearly a third of the students to half the students not telling me friction between where. Okay, I've emphasized this umpteen times, but yet this error is still very prevalent. It cannot and it must not be reflected in your prelims or your PSLE paper. I want 0. Fundamental mistakes that should not be there. Okay, and then of course, because it reduces the thickness, it makes it sharper, like as explained earlier.
Next, Rosa also noticed her mother splash some water on object M after sharpening the knife for a while. Explain why. So in this question, right, most students got the idea. However, what they don't get is the exact phrasing. And the phrasing of this is really not that difficult. Okay? Why? Now, in the first place, you must tell me, okay, there are two possible answers to this. I want to explain both because I find that both is logical. Okay, depending on how you feel it. Now, the first one is talking about your water as a lubricant, right? So, because you want it to be able to move back and forth, okay, with some amount of ease. Obviously, yes, you want friction, but you see, if it's going to be so difficult until you cannot even put it apart, when you put too much friction at once, you may end up breaking the blade, or it could prove to be very difficult for a lady who is very petite in size, right? Because usually at homes is your mom. I'm not being stereotypical. I'm just saying usually it's a lady who might be doing the cooking. Of course, you have the big chefs, which are usually males because they have to handle very big woks and everything else. They need the strength, but I'm just saying that usually that's the case. So you want some water to reduce the friction, so it's easier to actually move back and forth. Okay, so that's the first plausible answer. So for that answer, right, you have to tell me that water acts as a lubricant. Okay, you cannot just straight away, oh, water reduces friction, or water makes it smoother. And once again, same issue. When you have this answer, people tend to go, oh, water reduces friction, full stop. Or water reduces friction on M. Then I'm thinking, yeah, but friction is a contact force. There must be two. Okay? So how would the answer look like? So water acts as a friction. Sorry, as a lubricant. I've said many times the word lubricant has to be there. Okay? Which reduces friction between the knife and object M, right? Now the next answer has got to do with the part about lowering the temperature due to friction. Okay, so once again, I find that it's lacking a lot of very important fundamental details. Like for example, how was the heat produced? Oh, it's produced by friction. Okay, so friction between which two surfaces, right? And then it's good if, let's just say, you can complete your answer by saying things like, don't just use the word cool off. I know, okay, in the exam you'll probably get it right, but it's good to tell me how. Okay, right? So lost heat to the water, correct or not? Okay, so how can you actually craft a very complete answer? So an alternative answer would look something like, okay, so you would say something like heat is generated, okay, through friction or by friction between the knife and object M. Right? So you talk about the heat, half a mark. Then after that, you talk about the water. Okay? The water, okay, or rather you say heat will be lost to the water, hence cooling down the knife. Okay, sorry, heat from the knife and water. And water, my goodness, sorry, and object M. My bad. Okay, will be lost to the water, hence cooling down both. Okay. So a lot of these are very fundamental, but a lot of times the answer is not complete. So as you can see, a 1-mark question, right, sometimes really require you to write quite a bit in order to be very specific. That's why you need to be very clear about your concepts, so that when doing exams, you know what to write straight away. Okay? Yes, you may need time to formulate your answers, but certain key things like, oh, from where to where, heat is lost from where to where, straight away you should be able to pen it down. Or even things like, oh, when I talk about friction, it must be between two contact places. There is no second way around it. Okay, these are things that should come as a second nature to you. Alright, shouldn't take too much time to think. Okay, moving on. Okay, 2 similar toy parachutes A and B were used to carry out the experiment as shown below. Before the start of the experiment, holes were made in the material of toy parachute B. Okay, each of the spring balancers was secured to the ground by a string. The string is here. Whenever the toy parachutes were lifted off the ground by the wind, the average force measured by the spring balancers were recorded. Okay, as shown in the table below. Explain why the force measured when B is lifted off the ground is always less, okay, than the force measured for A. So we're talking about forces in this case. This should come quite familiar to some. Alright? So when you look at this, you see the word parachute. Okay, you see the word force somewhere. You see the word spring balancers. So this would hint you that this topic is probably testing, this question is probably testing you on the topic of forces, right? So you know in forces, when you see things like parachute together with wind, you know that this is a question that is, the concept they want to test you on is probably, okay, on on air resistance. Okay? On air resistance. So because it's on air resistance, right, you know that it's got to talk about your surface area. Correct? Because the greater the surface area exposed to the wind or to your air, okay, the greater the air resistance. So right off the top, right, I already know already. Parachute toy B, okay, probably has lesser, okay, surface area, which results in lesser, okay, air resistance experience as compared to A, which has more surface area, which results in more air resistance. Okay, now you will also need to understand okay, that this question, right, requires one to look at forces very, very carefully. Okay, and because it is an experimental setup, once again we should look at the change and constant variables or the measured variables. So what happens is that you will notice that the measured variable in this case is the amount of force that's on your spring balance. That is actually your measured variable. And your change variable is the amount of surface area. Okay, determined by whether Are there holes or no holes? Okay? So, when you look at it, right, you will realize that in A, technically, okay, the amount of force is always higher. Why? Because if you look at it, there is a higher amount of air resistance acting against it as compared to B. And this is actually a superlative question now, so it should be higher, lower. Okay? So in B, because it has got holes, air can pass through it. So this will reduce the amount of air resistance, okay, or friction between the parachute and the air. So if you want to use air resistance, you do not need to use between, the term between, because air resistance is already so-called within that definition of that term. You know that it's actually due to air, okay? So because it allows air to go through, it's always lesser. So how do we craft this? So obviously you would need to talk about surface area. So compare and contrast, right? So this is a compare question. You have to compare. So how would my answer look like? So B has holes, reducing surface area, which allow air to pass through, reducing air resistance. However, A does not have holes, hence it has a greater surface area hence more resistance, more air resistance than B. Okay? Then the next question goes, to reduce the risk of a toy parachute being blown away free by wind, a stronger metal chain was used to replace the string attached to the spring balancers. How will this change to the experiment affect the results? So when you think about it, okay, a stronger metal chain versus a string, what is the difference? The difference would be about mass, right? The difference is mass between the string and the metal chain. So when you think about it, if your string is going to be changed to metal now, and there is more mass, so an increase in mass will result in an increase in gravity acting on the chain, right? Or on the setup, because since your chain is that also has weight on it. So because of that, how does it affect the results? Okay, some of you go, it will affect the results. It's already reflected, it will affect the result, right? But they're asking you how. Okay, so because now that you have additional mass on it, then obviously you are going to need more wind, right? More force is needed to lift it up now. Just like if I ask you to lift a 10 kg box, and then I say, okay, on the 10 kg box, I feel that it's not secure enough. So I'm going to change the box from a cardboard box to a metal case box. So from a cardboard box to a metal case box, maybe there's an additional 3 kg. You're gonna need more force to lift it up. So that's the same basic theory. So the average force needed to lift the parachute will increase. Okay? So this is a prediction question. Alright, moving on. Next question, fly swatter. Okay? So fly swatters are swung at the flies to hit them. Okay? So the fly is here. Let's zoom in. Hello fly. Okay, and then you want to smack it. Now, think about it. Your flies are very fast. Right? I hope most of you know that. So basically your fly swatter also need to react very quickly. Okay, that's one thing you know, in order to be effective. Now the pictures below show the two designs of fly swatters. Design K has more holes in it, while design J does not have any holes. So you already did the first question, the prior question, right? So judging based on these, you already know that this is a question that is probably on forces and talking about air resistance. So looking at it, the one with the more holes one will have less surface area, equals to less air resistance. So when there's less air resistance, think about it. What is the whole idea? The whole idea of it is your fly is very fast. So your fly swatter needs to be faster than the fly. Think about it. So how does this actually then connect to what you need to answer? So let's look at the question. So when using the same amount of force, design K is more effective, right? In hitting flies than design J. Explain how is this so? So like I say already, the whole point about it is you need to hit something that is fast. So this has to be faster. So the word faster definitely needs to be there. Okay? So remember, it's a superlative question once again. More effective. We have told you that your answer needs the word more, less than, more than should be somewhere there. Okay, so let's see how we pan out. So the holes in K reduce, right, or has less air resistance. And allows it to move faster. Okay, you cannot say fast, it needs to be faster. Right? Because it's once again the question requires you to give an answer that is superlative. Have to. Okay? So be very careful. Next. Okay, this is a classic question, like I say 1 billion times. Water cycle is coming out. I repeat, water cycle is coming out. Usually it comes out as a form of real life application. Okay, now this is a little bit more different from what a typical water cycle question might be. Where's the trick of this? Okay, the trick is, okay, I'm gonna say one more time. Now, you need water vapor, you know, right? Like in a water cycle, there must be water vapor, there must be condensation, there must be evaporation. So you're gonna have to identify all these important components. Okay, you're gonna ask yourself this question. I know in order to condense, I must first have water vapor. But where am I going to find the water vapor? That is a question that you need to identify. And then after that, in order to do that, let's talk about some questions first. So a hot pizza, okay, was placed in the box as shown. After a few minutes, some water droplets will form on the inner side of the cover of the box. So right off the top, if there is water droplet, then what must have happened? Condensation must have happened, right? Now, if there's condensation happening, then I first need to have what? Heat loss. Correct? So in order to have heat loss, I must first find a cooler surface. Right? So this talks about the condensation part. This is actually part 2. Why part 2? Because actually before even there's part 2, there is actually part 1. Okay? Because in order for this whole thing to even happen, your water vapor needs to be formed. Then where is your water vapor? Your water vapor comes from where? Okay? So basically you need to answer. Okay? Your water vapor would probably come from evaporation. The process of evaporation, right? But then again, you need to then identify where is the source of your water vapor. Right? Source of water. Because, okay, or water vapor at least. Okay, or source, I would say source of water vapor. So was it from a pool of water? Was it from the pizza? Was it from, I don't know, the air? Okay, you have to figure out, and then you craft your answers, because there are 2 plausible answers. Okay, so the question asks you, how the water vapor droplets form on the inner part of the cover of the box. So there are 2 parts. The first part is about identification of where your water vapor came from. Now, there are 2 plausible answers to this. So you need to be very clear. The first thing, okay, is the pizza itself. When you make a pizza, okay, obviously there is water in the dough, okay, and there is water in some of your ingredients. So you think about it, you go and cook the pizza already, okay, the pizza's temperature is going to be very high. So what's going to happen is that, okay, water is just going to evaporate off from your pizza, okay, because the water inside is warm, so it will evaporate, and then after that become water vapor, warm water vapor. Okay, that's your first scenario. Okay, so then you're gonna ask me, then the gain heat how? Okay, the gain heat, because students are always taught that, okay, in order for it to become water vapor, the source of water must first gain heat, like gain heat from the sun and evaporated, right? So in this case, right, it's more like the water in the pizza was already heated up in the oven. Think about it. Okay, so in this case, it's okay to just say the water in the pizza gained heat and evaporated, because the gain heat portion came from the oven. So that part not very clear. So the second source of water vapor that is plausible is actually in the surrounding air itself. Because don't forget, your air is actually a mixture of oxygen, carbon dioxide, helium, and many other, including water vapor that is in the air. So your water vapor in the air could potentially gain heat from your pizza. Because you think about it, when you first put the pizza into the paper cardboard, there is air in the paper cardboard already. okay, which has water vapor, but it's really not that hot. However, it would gain heat from the pizza because the pizza is hot, right? It came out of the oven. So that is another source of your water vapor. So in this case, it's really how you identify. Then the rest is pretty straightforward if you ask me, because then, you know, the warmer water vapor will rise, and then when it rises, it touches the cooler surface, okay, of the box, lost heat to it, and then condensed to become water droplets. Okay, so how would your answer look like? So, in this case, would be, I would say that the water vapor from the air in the box gain heat from the pizza, from the hot pizza, and became warmer. Right? So when it became warmer, it actually, okay, went up. It rises up. Okay, so you say warmer water vapor then touches the cooler inner surface of the box, lost heat to it, and condense to become water droplets. Okay? So in this case, there can be evaporation, there can also be no evaporation, depending on how you answer it. If you want to use evaporation, you will have to talk about how the water inside the pizza itself gains heat and then after that evaporated. Now, then the next one. The next question, they show another pizza placed in a similar box. What is the difference between the two scenarios? I always say when there are two scenarios, especially when diagrams are drawn, there is a reason and you should always compare. Now, the main difference was that there were some holes and this was the so-called change variable. And you realize that there is a measured variable here, even though it's not exactly like an experimental setup. The measured variable is actually the amount of water, water droplets, correct? So they say, give a reason on how the holes help to reduce the amount of water droplets formed. So this is actually the change variable. This is actually the measured variable, my apologies. Okay, so when you think about it, your water droplets actually came from, how do you form them? Condensation. So in order to get condensation, what must you have? You need water vapor. So any steps that either affect condensation itself or the amount of water vapor, okay, this will actually compromise the amount of water droplets. So if I can eliminate water vapor, I have less condensation, and then I will have less amount of water droplets. Either than that, or if I can reduce condensation, I can also reduce the amount of water droplets. So there are two plausible answers, but I will only pen down the most obvious one. When you have holes, your warmer water vapor will be able to escape, right? So if it's able to escape through the holes, there is essentially lesser water vapor. If there's lesser water vapor, there'll be lesser condensation, resulting in the reduction of the amount of water droplets formed. It is actually that simple. Another way that is more complicated, if you ask me, but is also factually correct, would be that by having holes, there is actually a decrease in surface area, okay, available for the water vapor to touch and then lose heat too. So with lesser surface area, you have lesser rate of condensation. But if you ask me, what is the main idea is to really allow the water vapor to leave, okay, or to escape. So how would my answer be? The warm water vapor from the box is able to escape from the hole. Okay? So less water vapor condenses. Alright, so the idea is to reduce condensation. Okay, next question is a very straightforward question. Now the boxes of pizzas are placed in an insulated delivery bag. Okay, insulated delivery bag. So that's why our students always have this misconception that there's such thing as insulators of heat. Don't have. It's only poor conductors of heat. Be very careful. Talking about materials, the word insulator can only be used for electrical conductors. Okay, just to be sure. Okay, so there is a layer of air. So you see the word air here. Okay, that should ring a bell already. Okay, and tells you that somewhere layer of air needs to be written down, right? Poor conductor of heat. Okay, poor conductor of heat. So explain why the boxes of pizzas are able to remain warm in the insulated delivery bag for a longer period of time. So once again, it's a question that requires you to give a superlative answer, longer. Okay? So remain warm means what? Less heat loss. Right? So it's already very clear already. Because there is a layer of air, you think about it, between the material of the box, okay? There's a layer of air. And air is a poor conductor of heat. It will actually prevent heat being lost from the pizza to the outside surrounding. It will slow down the rate of heat loss. And this is the part that a lot of students have issue trying to answer, because what happens is that a lot of students don't understand that it's required, okay, to talk about heat loss from where to where. So I would pen it down as such. Okay, air acts, or air is a poor conductor. Of heat. Hence, rate of heat loss. Be very careful, it's always rate. Rate of heat loss from where? From the pizza to the surrounding is reduced. So what I want to see is really directional. I need to see from where to where. I need to see that air is a poor conductor. So this is a bit of a cause and effect. Alright? Okay, for this question, Mary wanted to find out if the exposed surface area of an object affects the rate of heat loss to the surroundings. She filled two similar beakers, M and N, with 300 ml of water at 100 degrees Celsius. She then surrounded beaker N with 6 other similar beakers, all filled with 300 ml of water at 100 degrees. So whenever there's a diagram, I will always ask my students to compare. There is no second guess about it. Always compare to know what's the difference. So when you look at this, right, you know that in the first experiment A, there is only 1 beaker. In B, there are 7 beakers altogether. Now, they are all similar actually. The only difference is that in A, I would say that it's got more exposed surface area, right? Because if you take a look at it, okay, for M, in every direction, heat could be lost. Whereas when you look at N, right, because it is surrounded, okay, it's got less exposed surface area. So therefore, your N, the one in the center, should be able to retain its heat. Okay, and rate of heat loss will be slower over here. Okay, these are my first thoughts when I look at this, and then I continue reading. Mary measured the temperature of water in both M and N every 5 minutes and recorded the graph below. So even before looking at a graph, right, I should get a good understanding. So then I can actually align what I understand, okay, to what the graph might show. So I should have a prediction already. So beaker N should lose heat slower because it's got less surface area. That's my guess, okay, less surface area as compared to beaker M, which has more surface area. So because less surface area means rate of heat loss should be less. Whereas for the other side, more surface or exposed surface area means that my rate of heat loss should increase. Right? So let's see if it tallies with my graph. So as you can see, for N, which is over here, indeed, it retains a higher temperature at every point because this is a solid line, right? So when you compare the two, if you take a look at N, which I'm going to highlight in red, and then you look at M, which I highlighted in green, you will see that N is always at a higher temperature at every time point. This is timer. So at every minute, it is always at a higher temperature when I compare it to M. So this means that my thinking is correct. With a lower surface area, rate of heat loss is lesser. That's why N is able to retain at a higher temperature as compared to, okay, beaker M, which is actually at a greater rate of heat loss every single minute, okay, due to the greater exposed surface area. So then I go on to read the question. Based on the data recorded in the graph above, what can Mary conclude about the experiment? So from here, okay, after comparing, right, you know that B has a N has a smaller surface area, exposed area, okay? So the smaller the surface area of exposure, the smaller the rate of heat loss, okay? Or vice versa. The greater the exposed surface area of an object, the higher the rate of heat loss to the surrounding. Okay, so let me just pen it down. Okay, the greater the exposed surface area of an object, the higher the rate of heat loss. Okay? Or heat loss, sorry, heat loss. Okay. So remember, one other thing to know about open-ended question is usually the questions are related. And the first few questions are there to help you answer or form a basis for the later on question within the same question. So then they asked you, okay, a family of lemurs was spotted huddling together on a cold and windy day. Okay, so basically, all these things you need to actually know why, okay, and how it is related. So when they're huddling together, right, I would think about it. When they huddle together, this actually looks something like this, right? Huddle together. And so I'm using the answer that, or the thinking that I've crafted for the first part to help me answer the second part. So remember, when the beakers were clustered together, they actually have a lower surface area, exposed surface area. So in this case, so spotted huddling together must be because they wanted, or probably could be because they wanted to also reduce their exposed surface area. So does this make sense? So on a cold windy day, so obviously on a cold windy day, you don't want to be losing body heat to the surrounding at a very fast rate. So yes, it actually makes sense. Okay? So then we go on to read. Based on the above experiment, how does this behavior help the animal to stay warm? So this confirms my thinking once again. So stay warm means reduce rate of heat loss. Right? So because you want to reduce rate of heat loss, okay, you want to reduce the exposed surface area. So we can say that, okay, huddling together reduces the exposed surface of an animal, hence the rate of heat loss from, make sure you tell me from where to where, from the bodies or from the lemurs, okay, to the surrounding is reduced. So many students have forgotten to tell me explicitly from where to where. Okay, so this is a very fundamental issue, and this is why I always tell students that you need to go back and look at what's the fundamental demands when we talk about heat transfer. It's always from where to where. Okay? Very important. Okay, moving on to the next question. Okay. Ramesh had two identical flasks, P and Q, each fitted with a rubber stopper and a funnel containing an equal amount of water. So once again, when you have two diagrams next to each other, the key thing is always to compare. Okay? So the first thing I noticed is that the difference is that in flask Q, there is a gap, but there is no gap in flask P. Okay, then I continue to read on. He observed that water flowed in more quickly into one flask than the other. Which flask, P or Q, will contain more water after a while? Explain your answer. So this is a question that is on matter actually. And the concept that they're testing you is something that is very, very, very common, which is that matter occupies space. So in this case, the matter they're testing you explicitly on will be your air and water. Doesn't matter, okay? You know that they both occupy space. So essentially, right, the whole space in P and Q is being occupied by air. However, the difference is that in Q, you will notice that the air is able to escape. So when air is able to escape through this gap, because we already pointed out that this is the key difference, because air can escape, your water in Q can actually go in at a faster rate to displace the air. Now, this word displacement means to replace something else that was there previously, that or to push it out. Okay, so that is the meaning of displace. Now, if you choose not to use the word displace, you have to tell me what was occupying in that space previously. Okay, so I would rather you talk about using the word displace. Okay, but you must tell me displace what lah. Okay, so let's see how your answer will be crafted out. So your answer will look like, okay, Q. Alright, so Y, so air in flask Q escape or is able to escape through the gap, okay, allowing water to enter the flask more quickly to displace the escape air. Okay, because that is what is being displaced. Alright.